And if you have questions, you ask me.
Okay.
I have a pad and pencil there for you.
Okay. I'm going to record it right on here. I'm going to record it on this thing right here. So. Oh, okay.
Now, is there any question you want to ask first, or how you going to do this?
Well, I guess I can ask you a few questions, and if any of your stories don't meet any of the questions, then you can talk about that at the end, I guess.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the first question would be where you were born and when.
Oh, I was born in Manhattan.
Okay.
On January 6, 1901.
Okay. And where did your family live when you were a child? In Manhattan?
My family lived in Manhattan.
Okay. What are some of the things that you remember about the Depression?
Oh, the Depression. It was very sad because it came on sooner than we ever thought about. We never thought about those things. And in the meantime, I had married and moved to New Jersey because my husband, John Thompson, lives here. When I moved here, I had 3 children. Well, by the time the Depression came, I had 5. So to live with 5 children in the Depression wasn't easy.
Yes.
John would get up early in the morning and go to work at 6 o'clock and come home at night around 8 or 9 because they were Thompson Brothers movers. Well, when he came home on Saturday night after working all week, he came home with $10. There was no money in circulation. We were glad to get the $10. In the meantime, a big store opened in Hackensack. It was like bigger than any grocery store of today, and the name of it was Packets. So we would take our $10 and go down there and buy whatever we had to have, like stew meat, so that I could make a big pot of stew, or rice, where I could make a big pot of rice. My mother-in-law lived about 150 feet, 3 lots between her house and mine. She made her own noodles, which helped. She taught me how to make jelly, which helped. So depression was a terrible thing to live through.
Yes.
If I had sugar and my neighbor across the street didn't have any, I would give her a half a cup of sugar, and she would give me salt or pepper. We traded. We had to. And nobody in the town looked any different. We were all in the same boat. So that depression was hard to live through, really. Until you do it, you'd never realize how sad it is. Well, that's the way we lived for quite some time. There were many men laid off on their jobs.
Right.
My husband worked for Thompson Brothers, movers worked with the brothers. When they moved these people particularly would rent a little house, they were put out. They couldn't pay the rent.
Right.
So they'd have to put their furniture in the warehouse. Thompson Brothers would bring them there. They had no money to pay. Where were they going to get the money? At the end of the week, maybe one would pay, or maybe they'd get a loan from the bank to pay the workers. It was a terrible, terrible thing to live through. But John, this town is different. At the end of the Depression, John, we were one family because we traded with one another. We loaned sneakers for the kids. We loaned undies. We loaned nighties. We'd borrow a blanket and they would borrow. We just traded. We never sold. There was no money to sell. So we traded. And really and truly, John, it brought us close together.
Right.
Now, from Howland Avenue to Main Street, John, there was a big farm from Kindercamack Road to Van Suren Park. And he was the mayor of the town, and his name was J. Pell Zabriskie.
Okay.
Now, every Monday morning, this big farm, they had trucks that used to go out to sell throughout the county. On Monday morning, there'd be a bag, about, a brown bag like that, and it would be filled with groceries to all the little houses. Mrs. Zabriskie had the men that worked on the farm do that. Great help to all of us.
Wow.
And about every third week, you'd find a little chicken in that bag.
Wow.
Well, John, that was a gold mine for all of us. So that the Depression was very hard to live through.
That's great.
But we managed. And today our town has never changed because we are a family. And then if the old people who weren't, I always felt they didn't have too much to eat, the man would fall out of bed, or the woman, and there's where the volunteer firemen came in. You'd call the firehouse, and those young fellows, and they were like you and a little older, they would run over to the house and help put the man back in bed, or the woman, so that we really were a solid, good town. We've never changed. So all my life, I can tell you, through a depression, and with my children and my husband, we were always happy, even though there were times we went to bed on the hungry side. But the next day, then you look forward to something else. And your neighbor would have, and you would trade. We never sold. We never gave. We couldn't. We traded. John brought us very close together.
That's great.
So a depression was a terrible thing to live through. A friend of my husband's, who owned a business in New York, sent me a crate of salmon, canned salmon. When I got that crate, it was better than winning the largest lottery. I called my neighbors and told them what I got. So you'd give them a can of salmon for maybe a cup of rice, and a can of salmon to this one, and maybe for, I would say, potatoes. I used to go to Packers with my $10, I'd buy a bag of potatoes that high. You couldn't buy a little bag, you had to get a big bag. And you had to pay for it or you couldn't get it. Well, the $10 was gone. And I held out too long for what you got. But then we traded. It was a very sad time. Many people died during the Depression, children too. But we made the most of it. And here I am alive and kicking at 100 when I thought at 35 my days were done. Now if you have more questions.
Okay. There's a man on my road. His name is Maurice Finney.
Spinner?
Finney, F-I-N-N-I-E.
Yes.
And he's about 90, I'd say.
Yes.
And he had a fall, so he fell down this house. I couldn't interview him. But he actually knew Franklin Roosevelt.
He was our president.
Yep.
And he was a very good president. He's the president that put through the bill for Social Security.
Right.
Because he knew through that depression how much it meant to old people who had no money. It was a wonderful bill. If it had been used correctly, it would go on forever and ever. But then they began to use it for welfare, and they had no right to touch it, but they did. But nevertheless, we still get Social Security, and I'm sure there isn't anybody that gets it that don't think of the president. He was a good president.
He was. Everybody who we've learned about how a lot of the people that lived during the Depression absolutely loved him as a president. Loved everything that he did.
Even prayed for him. Oh yes, but it was hard times. Believe me, it was rough times. But we shared. If we didn't, John, I don't think anybody would have existed. There were no such thing as a car. Everybody was riding on bicycles. That's the only way they got to and from work. Now, the only thing we had, John, in those days was a coal stove. We had no gas. Gas wasn't here. So we had to get only the coal we could use for that week because we had no money for it. The next week they'd come and give us enough for the next week. So that when the Depression was over, it took us at least 5-10 years to pay back. So that the Depression lasted so long before we really got our bills paid so that we could really go and order stuff like we did before the Depression. That was the saddest part, John, paying back what you owed for your coal. Now, we had no refrigerator those days, John. We had an ice box. And every other day, the man would bring a cake of ice and put it in a box. And that used to leak down. We had a little pot underneath the ice box. And 3 or 4 times a day, you had to empty that. So it was an awful lot. And then you couldn't pay the iceman. It was heartbreaking to live through it. And yet, we didn't feel that way at the time, because what you didn't have, your neighbor had, and you'd share half of what you had with them, so that you weren't embarrassed because we were all in the same boat. It was sad when I think of it, and some of the men riding, and then they run across the street and borrow his bicycle. You know, it was a sad time. But you'd be surprised what you can do when you have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So nobody in town had cars at all?
Nobody that I know of, even the farmers. They used to, well, the farmers. Now, my father-in-law, he was what you call a justice of the peace in River Edge, but that was in the late 20s and the 30s. After that, of course, then we had a police department. We used to just have more or less volunteer firemen and men that used to act like policemen until much later when we had our police chief, Charlie Napastack, and then other policemen, Joe Hayes, a few other men in town, Mr. Phillips. They were the police department. But our volunteers from the beginning of time, they were the greatest. We had a couple of bad fires where a beautiful couple were burned to death. They let their grandchildren who were visiting for Christmas from California, they let the children out on the balcony, and the kids could jump off. It was like a porch, you know. The kids could jump off, and they ran down the street to a house at 2 in the morning, and the house belonged to the minister, and he let them in. But it took a while to wake that family. One neighbor living on a corner saw Mr. Kirby put the children on that porch, and they jumped off. So he thought the Kirbys got out. But by the time the volunteer firemen got there, pulling a hose that was connected with the brook or something where the water came from, why, the couple had gone upstairs, I don't know, for their jewelry, for their bank book or what have you, and they died. After that, then we formed an auxiliary, but that had nothing to do with the Depression. But those volunteers, in that time, the fire was, the volunteers were very good. When they went up on the ladder in the back of the house, the couple were laying on the floor as if they were going downstairs to get out. But they were overcome by the smoke. They weren't too badly burned, but bad enough. But all sad times during the Depression.
Really is sad.
Then we were very saddened for a long time because they were beautiful people. We loved them. Yeah. But what else can I tell you? Have you another question for me?
I guess you've pretty much told me about what life was like.
Oh, yeah.
You told me about the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Everyone got around by bicycle, like you said.
That's right. And we had the icebox and the coal stove, and they called it a potbelly stove. It was a round stove, round. And it had like a lid on the top, and we had a lifter that would lift the lid up to put the coal and the wood in. And then we had a little, I don't know what kind of oil we used. You only needed a drop in there, and it started the fire. But then later we had a big coal stove with an oven. God, when that came in, I was thrilled. It was beautiful, but it was a lot of work. We had to, get the ashes out at night and get it ready for the next morning to start the fire. But that was all part of the Depression. We got through it. But they were children died too. There was I didn't have money, John.
Sad.
It was very sad. But they used to borrow train money for tickets to get to New York to work.
So they traded food for tickets so they didn't get to work into New York City?
We did all kinds of things. We all seemed to be a family. No embarrassing or anything. We all one another. Clothes, everything. We had to live together. So we did. It took a long time. I remember in the early 30s, I guess it was. And where's the money? Well, when the men would come home with a little and we'd run shopping with what we had and we'd get back. And we would give neighbors sometimes that had nothing, a little of what we had. But it was sad. But we lived through it, and it took us, I would say, within my own home and my own self, it took a good 8 years, John, before we were back to where we were when the Depression began, because we had outstanding bills. I'm sure you were clear of all that. You never felt it were you. But you made it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What kind of social activities or special relationships do you remember?
Well, I remember the fireman having I remember, but this was the Depression started around 29.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I guess it was 32 or 33, when the fireman said, 35 I think it was. The fireman, the auxiliary started after this fire where a couple burned in 34.
Okay.
And the fireman said that if we wanted to, we could march with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, money was scarce. We went down to a little store in Hackensack and we bought dresses that buttoned like a man's shirt. But they were dresses that came to about your knee.
Mm-hmm.
We bought those dresses and we went in a little Navy shop and we bought the white sail hats.
Okay.
We went into Woolworths, the 5 and 10 store, and we bought a blue tie, and it was dark blue. So we all had white shoes and stockings. So we went and marched with the firemen. We marched in Garfield. In the middle of the parade, it rained. The navy blue tie ran all down on our white dresses. The water was in our sailor hat. And then one of the men who was he wasn't a volunteer, he got a couple of dollars. Anyway, he was a special policeman.
Okay.
He went around with a loudspeaker and told the people in town, the ladies that belong to the firemen, not the auxiliary, the women that belong to the firemen, they marched with the firemen today, and they won a trophy. So all you neighbors would like to come down to the hall. Now, do you know where the Feathers is? Do you know the name of that place?
Yes, the restaurant, yes.
Yes. Well, that downstairs in the basement was our fire department here, Company 2, that's down here.
Okay.
Upstairs was the North Hackensack Hall, because this section from Howland Avenue to Hackensack was known as North Hackensack.
Okay.
We joined River Edge later, but we all had one mayor in both towns. And the official family was part of the both towns. Well, all the neighbors came to the hall. We had to go home and change. We were soaked when we come home on the back of a fire engine. All the neighbors brought down goodies, and the mayor's wife came down with baskets of goodies. We had a party. And these young firemen, like you and your brothers, they played harmonicas. So we danced with harmonica music. Boy, we had a ball. That was the first social we had when the Depression was slowly going away. That was the first big party. And boy, we had a ball. But nevertheless, it took a long time, John, to get back on our feet of where we were. And to take our children out for new shoes, new clothes. It was glorious. But that was coming into 35 and 36, John. It lasted a long time.
Yes. And even longer after it even ended, you still...
Yes. Yeah. To pay your bills, to get back and be you.
Were there any special features of your town or neighborhood that changed during this time? Again, like you said, how everyone came together as a family.
Oh, right? Yes, we did. Yeah. We all cared, and we shared. But my father-in-law, who was the Justice of Peace, he had a carriage with a horse. And when I first came to visit, and I got off the train at North Hackensack and got in the carriage, I thought I was the Queen of England, because in New York City you traveled in what they called a trolley car before the buses were ever in service. Right. So that getting on a carriage to me, and I was very young, but my father-in-law had that, which was a godsend, because that's the way we went to church on Sunday, in the carriage. Otherwise, most people, and there were a few carriages here and there. The Zabriskis had a big carriage, and I think the officials in the town, those men may have had carriages. That was the only thing they had here. There was no bus or anything to take you anywhere. So large families had a carriage, but not too many. But most people did ride a bicycle. Okay. And you took it that way, and they had this fixture on the back, and the kids would be sitting in there, and blankets and everything. That's the way you took your children out, on bicycle. Yeah, it was quite something because there was no money for gas, even if you had a car.
Right.
But I don't remember cars in service at that time. They had these little delivery trucks.
Yeah.
Like the laundry man, you know, the wet wash man, they used to call them. And that's what you'd send your wash out at the end of the week in a big bag, and they called it wet wash. And then they brought it back that way, and they hung it out on your line behind your house. You had a big line. Every house had a big line on a wheel, you know. And you hang out your clothes that way with a clothespin. It was different times, John, but we use that line even to this day. There are many people have the line out in the backyard.
We still have them all hooked up onto my garage, and the pulley's still there, and the line's still there, and everything.
Oh yes.
Yep. Because of course my grandfather and my grandmother lived in the same house I'm living in now.
Oh, I really loved your grandma and grandpa. We were very Fran and Eddie, and we belonged to the fire department. And your grandma was a member the same as I am. And we had good times when the Depression was over. And your grandpa was, Eddie Mouthy, he was so nice. And your brothers and your sister, we were all good friends. And we still are. I felt very, very bad when your grandpa died because he was always down here, even though he lived up there. Every little affair. Eddie Mouthy was there with Fran.
Always.
But since he passed away, I haven't seen Fran. Once I saw her with Ruth Deneen.
She's with them a lot.
That's
of
good.
Course, my Aunt Mickey.
And I know your mom, and she's a darling person. She's a very, very lovely mother and very pretty. You're a lucky boy. You have nice parents.
Thanks.
Are there more questions, dear?
Yeah. Do you remember the political views of your friends or your relatives, and of course your own political views?
Oh, we were dyed-in-the-wool Republicans. And at first, my husband was on the school board for 5 years, and then the members of the official family came to him, which he knew because his father built a home here in 1900, long before I came here. And because I came from Manhattan, and we were married, we lived in Manhattan, and I moved here in 1927. Before, to me, this was really Greek country because I wasn't used to things. But during the Depression, I was taught how to make jelly and preserves, and we traded that too. Oh, it could have been worse. But now you ask me about politics.
Yeah, well, the political views that you and your friends or family had.
My husband and I were very active Republicans. He was the clerk in the town. He was on the council, president of the council, and the clerk of the village died of a heart attack overnight. The people in the town came to the house. We lived in a big, big house on Grand Avenue, and many people came along with the official family. Said, John, take it. Well, he was president of the council. After you're president of the council, you go on to be the mayor. He looked forward to that. But there was no way he could get out of it. Many people said, oh, John, you were born and raised here. You know everybody. You know the law of the clerk's office. Take it. After 3 weeks, he did take it. So that he was Republican clerk. He was the assistant to the mayor. When the mayor was out of town, he was the acting mayor. He was the campaign manager. Well, for 78 years, John, there was one party in this town. There were two parties. They were never elected, only the Republicans. And he was the clerk, and people would move in town, and he said, well, I have to tell you, I know you're a Democrat coming from the city. We live in a Republican town. So after they moved in, they went Republican. So for 78 years, we were Republican. And then in I guess it was 70, maybe 75, I can't really remember, in the 70s, then a Democratic mayor was elected. And his name was John Curran. But really and truly, John, it's hard for me to say it, but there was no difference. John Curran was a nice mayor. And when they were elected to office, you respect them. And they have their ideas. And there are changes made, but you have to live with that. To the victor belongs the spoil. So, actually, I am a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. But there are times when you feel, well, he's so nice, and he's an independent. He ran for office. I think I'll back him. And that's the way life goes on. When you get older, you don't usually stick tight to what you are.
Yeah.
You make a little change.
Right.
And I enjoy it, John.
Okay. Did you or your family or your friends have any direct experiences with any of the New Deal programs?
New Deal program?
Yeah. What they were like AAA, or I don't know if you even know about the NIRA, like the what Franklin Roosevelt came up with, his New Deal.
Oh yeah, he came up with a lot of splendid ideas. It seemed to help many people, and then while he was in office, many people went back to work. He helped many. He was a real good, and his wife was a very intelligent lady, and she worked side by side. He really got far with a lot of help from her too. Although she wasn't a beautiful lady, she was a very intelligent lady. But to all of those, we didn't feel too much of that, John, because we were in this town. We were in a big city, so it didn't affect us as much as some of the young men went off and joined different things. But then, about 1939, World War II started in Poland. Then the first thing you know, we were dragged in, and that lasted a long time. That itself had an effect on all of us. Whereas two of my older sons, my older son graduated from Hackensack High School, and he served for the 1 year. He got out and he got a job in the Western Electric right away. And then 4 months later, he was drafted, which we never expected. He served his year. And that's how it came out. If they would serve a year immediately, they weren't eligible for the draft. He was 18. He served for the year. Got a job and was drafted, but that's all right. So all the boys. So then my next son graduated from Holy Trinity High School in Hackensack. He was 17. All the boys in that class joined the Navy because the priest, the Monsignor of the Trinity parish, was a chaplain in World War I, and he used to tell all the boys the stories about his experience. So when those kids from Trinity graduated, they all went in the Navy. Many of them. It was heartbreaking, but the kids wanted to do it. So that my older son was in World War II for 5 years. My other son was in the South Pacific for 3.5 years on a flat top. He didn't see the daylight for ages. But that has nothing to do with this. I'm only saying in 39, then World War II started. Well, then many men went to work, and Roosevelt was still in there, which was wonderful for people coming out of the Depression, particularly with children. And for older people, they hired anybody that was eligible to war. Down on the Bendix, where they made the guns and, all that, and bullets and all that stuff. Many people got a job and they never expected to work anymore. So it was a great help, although it was a bad war. But that's all part of the Depression. It was the ending.
And World War II, of course, served as the ending point to the Depression, but it lasted throughout and after people
yes, it did.
Recovering from it.
Yes, it certainly did, because you were just coming out and feeling like, oh, thank God that's over. And you're getting along great for a year and a half, then the war. Then we weren't supposed to get in it, and all of a sudden, we were in it. We had to help. I don't see that, but anyway, that's the way the world goes. I don't see why our boys today, wherever they are, they don't belong there. In Africa and those places. These boys come home with all kinds of diseases and everything. But of course, that's me talking. I'm hungry.
Well, that's pretty much it. If there's anything else that you might want to talk about to help me understand what life was like, but I think you pretty much covered it.
Well, I will tell you this, that in 1939, even though we were coming out of the Depression and feeling like ourselves, and with all these boys, what was I going to just turn you down? I was thinking of something to tell you.
It's okay. It's fine. It's quite all right.
Well, I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely. More.
John, it was so nice to meet you.
Me too.
And if ever you're down here, even with another boy,
okay,
and you want to stop and ring the bell.
Okay.
And see, I never heard my bell. When my daughter was in that room, I'm here. She said no bell rung.
Yeah,
There are times when it does stick, John. It don't always ring. And I moved into this apartment here in 1949, and I'm still here. But my husband died in 1987. And John, ask your dad, ask your grandma. He was missed. He was loved. When he was buried, John, the county police had to direct the traffic. Because as clerk, he was elected president of Bergen County Clerks Association. 4 years later, he was elected New Jersey State Clerks Association. And last year he served, and we went to a meeting in California of the clerks because the California clerk wanted John to swear him in. So they had to do these meetings every 3 months. He never missed. So he wouldn't take it, and